This is Matthew Cratter from Trader University, and today I want to talk about Nazi money printing and the Federal Reserve. If you're interested in learning how the economy actually works so you can make money in both bull and bear markets, or you just want to see what I'm trading or investing in, be sure to hit that subscribe button. So this video is not going to be about the Weimar Republic and the hyperinflation. Most people are familiar with what happened after World War I when after the Treaty of Versailles, very high war reparations were imposed on Germany. And as a result, they chose the route of hyperinflation. They printed a lot of money. It caused incredible hyperinflation. And so by September 1920, prices were 12 times as high as they had been before World War I. What a lot of people don't know is that this hyperinflation actually caused the stock market to go up a lot. This may be very similar to what's happening in the US right now with the Fed, quantitative easing and money printing, but the numbers are quite astounding. And again, we're going to get to the real topic in a second. But the German stock market in mark terms, in 1920, it looks like it was trading at about 500, the index was, and it proceeded to go close to 100 million, which is just hard to imagine. Actually, I take that back. It's 100 billion. I misread that. Even in US dollar terms, the stock market, it looks like it went up about, I would say about 4x, 3x or 4x. And so money printing can definitely help a stock market, but you don't really get ahead because in terms of real purchasing power, you're basically falling behind. But what I want to talk about is actually Nazi money printing. This is something a lot of people don't know about called Operation Bernhard. And this was a project that was actually approved by Hitler, and the plan was to print a lot of British banknotes and dump them on England, on Britain, to bring about the collapse of the economy. There have been a couple of movies or television series made about this, Private Schulz, you can check out, as well as a German film called The Counterfeiters. But the basic story was this. The plan was to counterfeit or forge British paper currency, banknotes, 30 billion pounds worth, which was a tremendous amount back then, and then drop it on England using German aircraft. So the Germans would print this up, the Nazis would print this up, drop it on the country, drop it on England, whom they were obviously fighting in World War II. And the idea was this would be a sort of financial warfare. It would cause hyperinflation. It would cause the British pound to lose its global reserve currency status. It was the main globally accepted currency back then. It was obviously backed by gold still, but this would cause hyperinflation and make it lose its reserve status, thus collapsing the British economy, making the country easier for the Nazis to invade. As I said, this plan was actually approved by Hitler, and they decided to focus on one of the higher denominations, which I believe it was the highest denomination at that point, the £5 note. And this just shows how much inflation we've obviously had since the 1940s. The idea that a £5 note would be a really large denomination is pretty funny. But the Nazis, they got pretty far with this. They basically, after Hitler approved the project, they succeeded in duplicating the rag paper that British paper money was printed on. And this took a long time to get the exact composition right. There was something about British water that was slightly different, and so the paper looked a little bit different. But the Nazis were able to do that. And what's even more impressive, they are actually able to crack the algorithm that was used to produce the serial numbers on the money. So they figured out what the pattern was, and so they can make money that was extremely realistic. Everyone who's looked into this says that these bills, this paper currency, was some of the best counterfeit money ever made. The money was actually physically produced by concentration camp prisoners at the Sachsenhausen concentration camp. They also tried, a little bit later in the war, they tried to do the same thing for the US dollar, but they found that the US dollar is actually, the images especially, were much more difficult to counterfeit. So I don't think they got all the way there, but they definitely had plans to do something similar to the dollar. But obviously the British pound was their main target since it was the world reserve currency at that point. After World War II, the US dollar was set up as the world reserve currency at Bretton Woods. Now the guy who was in charge of this, I guess he fell out of favor with his Nazi superior, and so the project sort of morphed. The money was never dropped on England. Halfway through the war, they sort of reinvigorated the project and started producing banknotes that they would spend, basically forged banknotes that they would spend to finance German intelligence operations. Now, this is interesting. This shows you that the British pound was the world reserve currency because they were spending these forged banknotes in Italy and in Austria and in Germany as well. Obviously, there wasn't a lot of faith in the German currency after what had happened in the Weimar Republic. It turns out that some of this forged money was actually used to obtain information from some spies that was used to free Mussolini in the 1943 Gran Sasso raid. So lots of history tied up here. And then at the end of the war, as the Allies approached the concentration camp, the prisoners started burning the money. They dumped the printing equipment into Lake Toplitz. And as it turns out, these prisoners were actually very lucky. The plan was to execute them, but there was some glitch where the Nazi soldiers were supposed to wait until they were all together, then execute them, and they weren't all together. And so, fortunately, these people survived. Here's the lake that some of the equipment was dropped into, Lake Toplitz, which I guess is in the Austrian Alps. You can actually buy pound notes. You can buy these banknotes. It looks like you can get them on eBay for about $200. These actual forged banknotes, and so they're still in circulation, and they're fairly valuable because there's not a lot of them. Ironically, this is one of the printing plates that I think was, if I remember correctly, was actually rescued from Lake Toplitz. This was what was used to print the money on the rag paper. So what do we take away from this? I think it's interesting because there's never any connection made between Operation Bernhard and central banks and the Federal Reserve. But the real moral of this, and what is basically, even in the Wikipedia article, it says the initial plan was to drop the notes over Britain, bring about a collapse of the British economy. The moral that I take from this story is that the best way to destroy a world reserve currency is to print a lot of it and dump it on a country. Obviously now we have electronic money printers. We have essentially digital money that the Federal Reserve prints. But I find it ironic that what Hitler failed to do, central banks have been trying to do ever since then, which is to print a lot of money, supposedly to prop up the economy. But what it succeeds in doing is devaluing the currency in real terms. So a US dollar used to buy 40 cents, used to buy a hamburger for 40 cents when I was a kid, and now a hamburger is obviously $4, $5, $6. And so what Hitler failed to do, Jerome Powell has been doing in earnest. It's much easier to print money these days. The ironic thing is that the Fed is doing it to its own country, hopefully with good intentions. But I would suggest that the way that gold, Bitcoin, the stock market, real estate prices have been behaving, this shows that there is a currency devaluation taking place. We can just see here the M2 money supply and how it's gone parabolic in the first quarter of 2020. It's flattened out a little bit, but we can expect it to just continue. If only you could trade this. This is the chart that never goes down and always goes up. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that subscribe and like button. Let me know your questions and comments in the comment section below. And thanks a lot for listening, and I'll see you in the next video.